All right. Hello, everybody. I see so many lovely faces coming into the room. I will be introducing our program, but for now, and I'll mention this again later, but if everybody wants to turn off their cameras as they're coming in, that would be wonderful. Good afternoon or good morning to wherever you may be zooming in from. I'm Rachel Messerich, Programs Manager, Legacy and Editorial for the American Craft Council and the coordinator behind the American Craft Forums series. I'm so pleased to welcome you all to this American Craft Forums program in association with our quarterly publication, American Craft Magazine. I'm speaking to you today from my home in Apple Valley, Minnesota, and representing the offices of the American Craft Council in Minneapolis, which are both located on the traditional, ancestral, and contemporary lands of the Dakota and Ojibwe people. This place carries a complicated and layered history. In the thousands of years the Dakota and Ojibwe people have been in relationship and kinship with the land here, and in the several hundred years since European settlers colonized the land that the state of Minnesota now occupies. The United States land seizure was a project of destruction that denied the Dakota and Ojibwe free and unhindered access to land that fundamentally shapes their identity and lives. We pay tribute to the Dakota and Ojibwe and invite you to consider the land on which you live and the confluence of legacies that bring you to stand where you are, particularly through critical reflection and conversation with your own community. Fostering conversation and community are at the heart of ACC's mission, and American Crafts serves as one of the most vital contributions in service to this mission, and hopefully to the field of craft and American culture. ACC's 80-plus-year-old publication contributes to the craft conversation by shining a light on the diversity, resilience, beauty, and impact of American craft and its makers. In 2023, we look at craft through the lens of 4 themes: inhabit, vessel, wild, and collect. The editorial team is just wrapping up the fall issue, which will be hitting mailboxes in mid-August, and has plans well underway for the winter 2024 issue, Light. We encourage pitches and submissions from our community, and we'll soon have more information on the rest of the 2024 themes on our website. Please check under Writer's Guidelines and Submissions for more information. Before I dive into the program and my introduction, I also just wanted to thank the ACC staff, particularly our Executive Director, Andrea Specht, our uber-talented editorial team, our amazing marketing team, and our Director of Finance and Administration, Tracy Lamperty, who is taking the behind-the-scenes tech helm today for today's program. The American Craft Council is a national nonprofit member-based organization. As such, I would also like to give a big shout out to our donors and members who make programs like this possible. And a very special thank you to the Minnesota State Arts Board and Wingate Charitable Foundation for their generous support. A few technical and logistical reminders. Please make sure that your camera is off and your audio is muted for the entirety of the program and conversation. We encourage you to participate in the talk via the chat feature and drop any comments or questions there. Closed captioning is available during this program. On the bottom of your Zoom screen, you'll see a closed caption symbol. Clicking that button will turn this feature on and off. This program will also be recorded and available for future viewing. In the summer issue, we plumb the depths of the varied meanings and experiences of the theme wild, a word that evokes nature and our environment, freedom and instinct, untamed, vibrant, and bold, powerful. So much of craft material has a direct connection to nature and the natural world, to the wild. And today we explore what it means to be an artist who centers the act of foraging and gathering their own natural materials as part of their work and practice. Inspired by Shannon Stratton's essay called Origin Stories, she describes thinking with materials, not just in terms of what we might be able to make from them, but what histories and stories we might release through that relationship, has the potential to push our minds to process the world through the Earth's perspective, to develop a kind of empathy with the larger, interconnected organism that is our planet. The artists in conversation today all deeply consider their material choices and the weight and significance they carry. How those materials and media are vessels for histories and storytelling, placemaking, place remembering, and efforts towards sustainability. and how the act of foraging requires them to be in a close relationship with the environment. Oftentimes, it's the materials themselves that tell the story. To help guide us and our speakers through this conversation on foraging and craft, I'd like to introduce our incredible moderator, Kimberly Coburn, who will in turn provide brief introductions for our speakers. Kimberly, I invite you to turn on your camera now. Kimberly is an Atlanta-based writer and community organizer. In 2013, she founded the Homestead Atlanta, a collective dedicated to fostering regenerative communities through skills-based education. Metrics of success were preserved in mason jars and carved from hardwood. They were measured in skills shared, ideas exchanged, goods bartered, and resources preserved. After the pandemic dictated an end to in-person programming, Kimberly shifted her exploration of the intersection between craft, the human spirit, and the natural world to the page. Her work has been featured in Salon, American Craft, The Bitter Southerner, Dark Mountain, and more. Thank you so much to all of you for being here. Thank you, Kimberly, and I'll leave it to you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Rachel, for that super generous introduction. And I wanted to thank the American Craft Council for gathering all of us together in this virtual community today to explore the ways that craft made from foraged materials can really deepen our intimacy with place and its history. I'm so excited to be in conversation this afternoon with three brilliant artisans who I'll introduce in more depth in just a few minutes. But their work is a collaboration with the land, and it explores all of the complexities and nuance that that kind of partnership brings with it. As Rachel mentioned, prior to the pandemic, where I turned my focus to writing about the ways that craft and the natural world reflect and enrich the human experience, I ran an urban folk school called the Homestead Atlanta for about 7 years. And in that time, I attended countless plant rambles and mushroom forays where people sometimes for the first time in their lives learned what plants had just been their silent allies on woodland trails and in sidewalk cracks their whole lives without them knowing. Watching somebody's eyes widen when they realized that free and nourishing food and medicine was just waiting at their feet every day. To see some kind of ancient gear click into place behind their eyes about the generosity of the land around them was honestly one of my favorite parts of the entire project. I recently in the mail got a new and very comprehensive field guide to foraging by Sam Thayer. I apologize to West Coast and international friends. This is just the Eastern and Central North America, but it is a beautiful book if you're interested in foraging for food. And in it, he says that foraging is the womb that nurtured our species into life. And as a human community, foraging is one of our most ancient practices, and creating is one of, I think, the most defining. For eons, crafts were born of the land where they were made. Baskets were woven from local rushes, pots were built from clay dug from riverbanks, even the famous cave paintings of handprints, which is they're really a visceral reminder of our sameness across tens or maybe even hundreds of thousands of years, were outlined in rich pigments of that particular place. But it's been a hot second since then, and our collective relationship to the land around us has, to put it mildly, changed pretty drastically in the intervening millennia. And foraging mirrors the increasing complexity of our relationship with place. And the challenges faced by contemporary foragers highlight some of our most urgent issues as a culture. Increased ecological degradation, urbanization, diaspora, and even forced displacement have alienated many of us from a personal relationship with place. Issues of accessibility, both in regards to land rights, to cultural biases, and even physical ability, pose an additional challenge to a lot of foragers. And for some, the land has not always been a place of plenty. It has historically been a site of violence and can in some places be a site of ongoing violence. but I hope and genuinely believe that both the act of foraging and the creation and sharing of art composed of foraged materials, like our wonderful featured artists today have done, can offer an avenue for healing the rifts of these traumatic pasts and the growing ecological alienation that we experience. So whether it is through a rainbow of pigments, the perfumed coil of sweetgrass, or the soil, crops, and human hair of a place and its people, this is an art that gives voice to the land. And I'm incredibly eager to listen to what it has to say. So it is my honor to introduce three talented artists who work in intimacy with place, its story, and its history. I will give you a brief introduction to their work and then hand it over to them to tell you more about themselves. So going in alphabetical order, I will be starting with Melonie Ancheta. Melonie Ancheta is a professional researcher, artist, and educator from Northwest Washington. She is the founder of Pigments Revealed Symposium, as well as founder and director of Pigments Revealed International, a nonprofit organization building a global pigment community and fostering pigment education and research. Her artwork has been exhibited in the preeminent Stonington Gallery in Seattle, as well as other galleries across Canada and the US. It can also be seen in museums and private collections around the world. Ancheta's 30 years of research on traditional Northwest Coast indigenous pigments and paint technology has supported the revitalization of important indigenous material and cultural knowledge and has been published in Smithsonian National Museum's American Indian Magazine, American Indian Culture, and Research Journal, and elsewhere. Ancheta lectures, gives workshops, and offers courses about pigments and traditional indigenous paint technologies and art. She is working on a book about traditional Northwest Coast indigenous pigments and paint technology. I'm also very excited to introduce you to Adebunmi Gbadebo, who is a multimedia artist who uses culturally and historically imbued materials to investigate the complexities between land, matter, and memory on various sites of slavery. Centering on deeply resonant materials like indigo dye, soil hand dug from plantations, and human Black hair collected throughout the diaspora. The resulting works tend to carry the stories of ancestors, families, and individuals either long overlooked or too closely surveilled. Born in New Jersey and based between Newark and Philadelphia, Gbadebo earned her BFA at the School of Visual Arts in New York. Gbadebo's works are included in the permanent collection at the Smithsonian National Museum of African Art, Smithsonian National Museum of African American History and Culture, the Minneapolis Institute of Art, the South Carolina State Museum, the Boston Museum of Fine Arts, the Newark Museum of Art, amongst others. Gbadebo has presented in exhibitions across the US and internationally in Asia and Europe. Also introducing today, Donovan Snype. Donovan Snype is an accomplished photographer, cinematographer, and artist. His work is remarkable, beautiful, and candid. He captures the true emotion of the moment, and he began photography at the age of 9 when his father let him use one of his discarded cameras, and he hasn't put down the camera since. Donovan learned the craft of sweetgrass basket weaving from his mother, Henrietta Snype, and has had his work featured in the Smithsonian. A native son of Charleston, Donovan has spent years honing his craft and is dedicated to the art and science of video and photography, as well as the preservation of Gullah Geechee culture through his work as an artist. He has worked on production sets such as Four Weddings and Army Wives, and has worked with celebrities such as Larry Miller, The Future, Juicy J, Roscoe Dash, and has filmed other major music artists in packed out arenas. Donovan is also a freelance writer for the Charleston Grit, and he believes that every moment deserves to be captured and cherished. Shooting with grace, style, and precision, Donovan ensures that every important detail is preserved so that it may be enjoyed time and time again. And I would like to now invite Melonie to turn on her camera, and I will let her introduce herself and follow on with the rest of our speakers.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for being here today, and I want to thank the American Craft Council for inviting me to participate in this program. Tracy, could I get you to turn on my slides? Tracy? There. Thank you. Just give me a second here, and Well, okay. So as Kimberly said, my name is Melonie Ancheta, and I like to stay busy. It's really an honor to be here today and to be invited to share a little bit about myself and my work with everybody. I'm an educator, artist, author, and natural pigment researcher. And for a lot of years, I've researched the traditional pigments and paint technology of Northwest Coast indigenous cultures. 2 years ago, with two friends of mine, I founded and organized Pigments Revealed Symposium. It was the first natural pigment symposium in the world. And shortly after that was over, I founded a nonprofit organization, an international nonprofit organization called Pigments Revealed International. And the main focus of Pigments Revealed International is to bring together people who are working with pigments, studying them, using them, everything, foraging for them, everything, to collaborate together and to learn from each other. I personally work with a wide variety of materials: copper, pigments, textiles, wood, leather, kind of anything I can find. And as such, I'm deeply interested in the nature of materials and our relationships with place, not just as a spot to obtain materials, but the relationships between place, materials, and humans, and how that has changed over time. Next slide. I've been foraging for more than 60 years, as you can see from this picture of me at 3. My mom always called me a little scavenger, but I clearly remember when I was 2, she and I often walked to a stream near our house to gather watercress, and I've always thought that's what began my love of foraging, although it could have been just liking finding food outside of our kitchen. And to my mom's dismay, everywhere I went, I collected rocks and earth and skeletons and stinky old shells and mosses and lichens, all sorts of things that I really loved identifying and studying. And during my teen years, I continued gathering, or scavenging, as my mother called it. But as a young mother, I began foraging seriously with intent for wild medicinal and edible plants, and I eventually began an herbal practice in my community. Next slide. Even as a child, one of the things that fascinated me most is what makes color. I always wanted to know, would this flower produce some kind of color, or what about this colored rock? And as we traveled in Eastern Washington while I was growing up, I asked my parents what made color striations in the rock cliffs, but I never got any satisfactory answers. So by the time I was 9, I was foraging library card catalogs for information, but even that didn't yield very many answers. And this lack of information is really what set me on this rather peripatetic lifelong pursuit of answers. By the way, the coloration in these cliffs is caused by lichens, not minerals in the rocks themselves. So it's a superficial coloration, but it is absolutely amazing and stunning, I think. Next slide. In the long history of humans, it's only been about 150 years, basically since the Industrial Revolution, since most people were able to have an intimate relationship with the land around them and the materials that the natural world provides. These relationships imbued place and materials with power, with meaning, with history and life. And among indigenous people is the belief that everything is potent with spiritual power. The plants, animals, rocks, waterways, mountains, and even weather are able to confer power or take it away. And this assists in an individual's capacity to learn and make meaning from their places through deliberate consciousness, through being in that place, in that moment, which in turn inspires reflection and creative action. Next slide. But experience, not just knowledge, is vital to knowing a place and the materials which one finds there. To know a place, one must experience it with acute awareness, with all senses open and receptive. Place provides more than just material resources. Place offers valuable information about those materials. I've lived my life with the belief that place is not just somewhere we pass through on our way somewhere else, nor is it just where we obtain raw materials. Places is as important as the materials one finds there, maybe even more important. Places help ground us in the physical world, and they give us a sense of belonging. They connect us to our ancestors, and they carry generational knowledge. They inform our language and even how we think and act. Our places are part of our cultures, our identities, and our behaviors and beliefs. And the materials gathered from these places are ripe with the spiritual potency of the place, but also the spiritual power of the plants and animals that live there. Next slide. 8 years, I think it's been 8 years ago, I lost my ability to be in my places and to learn new ones. And I lost my ability to forage. I'm in a wheelchair that does not accommodate this. It's been a devastating loss because the entire process of making, from gathering materials to sending them out the door as a final product, is profoundly part of my personal nature and history. Foraging, being in these places, isn't just a desire, it's a necessity. Place has influenced who I am as a human, as an artist, as a parent, as a grandparent, as a participant in our cultures. And with this loss, I also lost vital information about the materials I'm using. I can't feel the places from which they come anymore, and they feel abstracted to me. I have a lot of people who send me pigments from around the world, and I have amazing friends who are always happy to share with me. But personally, I've lost information about the nature of my materials through the loss of place. I believe my materials have lives, that they are other beings, and they undergo processes and changes just as humans do. But without being able to know the place that generated them, I feel like my relationships with these materials that are shared with me are incomplete. Next slide. But I believe that the loss has made me examine even more deeply the meaning of place and materials, and how our relationships with both influence our lives and our relationships with the natural and human worlds. It has also made me examine the role of raw materials in human lives. Using natural materials is an adventure. It's exploration, it's experimentation. You learn from your materials, and it's always fascinating to see what my materials will allow me to do with them and how they change over time. I don't seal my pigments. I don't do anything to my copper to prevent them from changing, I don't prevent them from following their nature. And seeking the nature of our materials helps us understand how they're connected to their place of origin. It helps us better understand ways in which we can use them, and it marks respect for the embodiment of place that exists in our materials. So many places with long histories of being in relationship with humans have been erased by colonization. This makes it even more important for us to create relationships with places that are still accessible. Through educating people about natural pigments at PRI, we're raising awareness, not just of the importance of importance and value of materials, but also how places represented and embodied in these materials. We're encouraging people to engage fully, physically, emotionally, and spiritually with place. Learn from it, know what it smells like at 7 a.m. compared to 7 p.m. Watch the changes throughout the day. Listen and feel. See how the light plays on the land. Look at the geology. Look at the animals. Everything. This all goes into what makes our materials. And through bonding with place, we can better understand our materials and use them according to their nature, not according to our will. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much, Melonie. That was fantastic. I can't wait to talk about some of the things that you brought up very shortly. I would also now really love to introduce Adebunmi and allow her to turn on her camera, introduce herself.
Hello, everyone. I'm really honored to be here. Thank you, American Craft Council, for inviting me to this conversation. I'll just get right into it so we can hear from everyone. I'll just kind of take you through my material journey and my relationship to land. So it kind of started off while I was in art school. I had a moment in an art history class that was, a lot of my education was building to this moment. I think especially being in those spaces, being in art school, taking these art history classes, looking at the history of art, and that's told through primarily the material paint. For me as a Black woman who, hopes to one day be a part of and recognized for my work and be a part of this history, you become acutely aware that this history of paint has nothing to do with you. And that in fact, what you're looking at is a history of white supremacy. And because the art history is primarily told through this material paint, I felt like in order to truly ground my practice in stories about people who look like me, who was to completely reject not just the subject matters, but also the material. So it kind of set me on this journey to look for, well, what material do I feel is connected to me, my history, my people, my culture, my politics, Blacks, and also that connects us beyond slavery, and that was Black hair. So here I have images of really primarily the dominant ways that I've been able to source hair as a material through hair donations and by partnering with barbershops. You could see in the central photo is kind of just a little snapshot of like 6 years of hair donations. And for me, more importantly, like hair was not just this, it meant a lot to me in that moment because it was a material that not only comes from these spaces like a Black barbershop or a woman's bathroom, but it is us, it is our body, it carries our DNA, it holds our history. And that kind of set me in a path to working with Black hair as a material. Yes.
I'm so sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to let you know that we are not seeing the images that you are seeing on your screen. We're
at
seeing
all.
something that says loading. So I wonder if it got stuck on the video that you were
Okay,
trying to share. Sorry
I
about that.
moved the video, but can you see it now?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Mhm.
So that kind of set me on a path. Well, I was saying, I often say, my work is made, is not just of my community, but is made from my community. And I believe like the work actually starts with the person and what their relationship with their hair. But it kind of set me on a path to look deeper into my own ancestry. So I started this series where I was kind of creating my own documents or archive, taking Black hair, forming them into flat shapes of paper and silk screening images of my ancestors. And I think like that series also pushed me to look more deeply into, now why isn't this hitting next? Yeah, hold on. It's not going to the next. Oh, okay, it is. Started forcing me to just ask more questions and take a deeper look into my ancestry. And that's when that series turned into this one, where where in asking those questions, I was able to learn that my family, our relationship to this land, to America, started on True Blue Plantation in Fort Mott, South Carolina, which was an indigo and rice plantation. And from there, through research and talking with family, I started this series where I was taking indigo and blue dyes and embedding it with Black hair, literally inserting ourselves back into these materials, kind of connected to the land, in cotton, and making these kind of indigo handmade paper sheets. And this image, like all the documents that I was finding in my research about True Blue, about indigo plantations in the American South, but also looking at our relationship to indigo, as an indigenous one, as one that we've always had a relationship with kind of crops and materials like indigo and rice. So this image is just a detailed shot of showing these ancient indigo dyeing vats in Kano, Nigeria, and juxtaposing that against the etchings from the 18th and 19th century of the process of indigo production on plantations in the South. But it was really important that I draw that bridge, that we were the ones who carried this practice, this relationship to the land, which is why enslavers specifically selected, stolen those Africans that had that knowledge, material knowledge. This is another detailed shot of documents that I silk screened back onto these hair papers, where you could see the prices, the ages, the names of enslaved people on wills. And I distinctly remember kind of this feeling of like excitement to have a name. The way in which we have been documented historically in the archives. In a lot of ways, it's a miracle to find a name. But also there was a lot of anger with how we were showing up as something to be inherited, to pass down. This document on the left, you see this is an appraisal list where they list humans and their price. You see $150, $130, $80, $70. And if you can make out at the very bottom, it says 60 head of cattle. So humans and animals were being appraised on this document. So there was things I was finding in my research, but also it was hitting me up against this wall of how we were showing up in these violent archives as nothing more than property. So there came a point when I was doing these sheets where I really realized I need to go to place that in order to really understand this place that I'm representing in my art, I need to stand on this land that my ancestors were enslaved and understand what this place feels like in my own body. And I found this article in my research of, which I didn't know at the time, but is a cousin who's been caring for the burial grounds of our ancestors in Fort Mott. There's about 3 main plantations: True Blue, Langsyne, Singleton Plantation. And he's been caring for them using his own resources. So now I had a direct family member, kind of a link, because there was a lot of trepidation, as you could imagine, going to a plantation that is also still owned by the descendants of the overseers and slave owning family. So this was an image I took from my first trip, which was in 2020. And I want to acknowledge that this land was originally the land of the Congaree people. And there's a major river, the Congaree River, which was kind of the like the Nile of this area that allowed cotton and rice and indigo to thrive. It was essential for growing those crops. But majority of this plantation, which is now growing cotton and wheat and corn, looks like this, just acres and acres and acres of cotton. And then there's these little nooks that you see in this red circle of these woodlands. And a lot of these woodlands hold the burial grounds for the enslaved and their descendants. I'm just going to quickly go through some of what this looks like. And I think on this trip, it was becoming acutely aware that, you know, within this space that has completely erased us, our presence, our influence, our contributions to the land, really some of the only kind of physical representations of us in this space was in these headstones. And you could see they were severely compromised because of the woodlands that they stay. You see severed headstones, you know, major kind of craters in the land to acknowledge that there is a body, but nothing like a lot of the headstones were kind of eroded and you couldn't make out a name. This is a direct descendant. So this would be my great uncle William. And you could see he was born at the tail end of slavery. But this really propelled me to try and identify other physical representations of our contributions to this land. So my cousin Jackie took me to a church that my ancestors built at the turn of right after the Civil War. Unfortunately, just to get that photo was an act of trespassing. This land is that church is currently owned by True Blue Plantation LLC, the descendants of the overseers who have turned this church into their hunting club. But I was able to inherit and secure through a cousin. Before our family lost ownership of this church, he secured the original church pews. So this is me and another curator, Terrence Washington, who I didn't know until this show that we were cousins, sitting on 2 of the original church pews made in the 1890s. I also learned that my enslaved ancestors were sent to University of South Carolina to build this house, the McCord House, which served as a hospital for the Confederate soldiers. But I was able to also salvage and save the original balusters of this land. of the house, sorry, and parts of the iron fence. But for me, although like termite and eroded, they represent that we were here. They represent our labor, our contributions to the land, our artistry. And to me, they feel like monuments to them. But I think more, I guess, what really kind of pushed me, or what transformed my practice by going to place, is seeing the land, experience the land, running my fingers through the land. And that kind of shifted my practice, where I started taking the soil of True Blue Plantation and making it into ceramic sculpture, embedding it with Black hair, Carolina gold rice. That was the major cash crop of not only South Carolina, but True Blue. And telling stories, thinking about how this land is a repository for memory, and all that is not captured and documented in archives is in this soil. Their blood, their sweat, their tears, and their very literal bodies are all the matter, the makeup of this land. So here's like images of the Carolina gold rice, you know, me literally shaping this land into vessels. And vesselhood has been really kind of the framework in which I think about this series, of really thinking about what this land holds. So, and this is a detailed shot of it holding the rice. And I even started recently and attaching bones, not human bones, but I like the ambiguity. Sometimes I'll just say bones of that I've excavated while digging the soil. So these are some recent works. And I guess I just want to end by saying I'm really trying to be aware and acknowledge that I don't want this to be a practice of just extraction. So a lot of my work involves not only documenting my trips, which becomes a new way of creating an archive, but also going back for cemetery cleanups. True Blue is 7 acres. And we've been really caring in a very deliberate, intentional way for this land. And these are some of the descendants that join in these cleanups. So, thank you.
Thank you, Adebunmi. That was beautiful. And I can't wait to be in conversation about that shortly. I would also like to introduce Donovan Snype to turn on his camera and speak a little bit about his work.
Right. Wait just a second. All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Donovan Snype. I am an artist, photographer, and sweetgrass basket maker from Charleston, South Carolina. I have been practicing the art of sweetgrass basket making since I was about 8 or 9 years old. It's one of the things you kind of have to learn growing up in Charleston and in a Black family. Just like how you sweep, how you clean windows, and how you make baskets. So it's very much a part of my life and how I grew up. I'm an artist and a photographer. I've been doing photography about 20 years or so. And I like photographing all types of things, primarily events, but I definitely like photographing nature and the natural landscape, because I think our planet is something very beautiful. It forms our actual physical reality. So it's very important for us to pay attention to it, I feel, and notice what's going on. As I said it before, I am from Charleston, South Carolina. I am of the Geechee Gullah. Geechee Gullah people are the descendants of the formerly enslaved Africans along the coast of North, South Carolina, and Florida, who, for just a myriad of reasons, were able to separate and pretty much isolate themselves from the culture at large. And in that separation and isolation, we were able to hold on to a lot of our our culture, our language, definitely ways of cooking and just ways of just interacting with one another. And we persist to this day. And we still live in the same areas, although we have migrated all over the world. But it is a actual cultural heritage, just like how you would recognize Latino or someone who's French or Haitian. Geechee Gullah is more or less the American version of that. And the corridor, like I said, it runs all the way from about Cape Fear, North Carolina, all the way down to the coast of Jacksonville, Florida. There are lots of things that are produced within the Geechee Gullah Nation. Agriculture and use of the water has been a primary source of resources for us. The water is extremely important because the water never forgets, and the land is what we get our sustenance off of. Sweetgrass baskets are one of the major artifacts and one of the most recognizable artifacts of Geechee Gullah culture. They are a coiled style basket that have their roots in Africa, specifically Senegal amongst the Wolof people. But the coil style is a very common weaving style in general. When the Africans were brought here during chattel slavery, we brought all the knowledge, skills, idioms of our language, all of that with us. And we also brought the skill of basket making as well. And when we arrived here, although we didn't have the same materials, we were still able to transform the natural environment into something that could be useful to us. Baskets have been sweetgrass baskets, I should say, are the longest, most continually produced American industrial product that there is. It's been around since before the Civil War, and there's been a basket produced pretty much every year since then. There's not been a year in American history that a sweetgrass basket has not been produced. And I say industrial product because it was used on plantations for many reasons. One of the cash crops that Adebunmi mentioned earlier was rice, and rice cultivation was what made Charleston the richest city on the planet at one point in time. The rice fanner is a basket here. This one that you see in this photograph is made by my mother. It was used to separate rice from its husk, and then also to use to store things. And Charleston has the distinction of being one of the places that you can pretty much only find this basket making, really with the majority or 99% of them being from Mount Pleasant, South Carolina. And these are the materials that we use to make the baskets. Generally, all baskets will start off with a pine needle knot, held together with fronds of palmetto leaves, and it's the sable palmetto specifically that we use. We use the heart of the tree, and then we make it into strips, and then we wrap those strips around the pine needles, coiling until it forms upon itself. And then we'll go ahead and add sweetgrass or bulrush, depending on the size and the nature of the basket. Bulrush is a very heavy material. Pretty much the traditional baskets used on a plantation are all those used prior to the 20th century. We're going to be primarily made out of bulrush because it's a very sturdy material. It's very tough. It's very heavy, but not always the most beautiful. Around the turn of the 20th century is when you start seeing sweetgrass being incorporated more so, just because the baskets are being used as decorative items and things around the home. And right around the time Highway 17 started expanding, basket makers started putting their baskets on the side of the road to sell, and they became a major and still remain a major source of income for a lot of people in Charleston. Here's some of my work. Like I said, I started making baskets when I was 8, but I didn't really get back into it until later on in life after I moved away from South Carolina, ironically. I started making baskets kind of as like a way to reconnect to home, because I was missing home in different ways, and I was felt like I was losing my connection. And so I decided to just kind of take something that I learned at home and reconnect it. And I think of baskets, sweetgrass baskets, as fine art. And the best thing I think you can do with art is to frame it and put it on a wall. So my work is primarily framed work, although I do have jewelry as well. As you can see, I have the pendant and bracelet, but my work is generally something that you would put on your wall to look at and appreciate. It's more or less the culmination of multiple journeys to create a piece. It's the journey of all of the seeds that became the pine, the palmetto, the bulrush, the sweetgrass. It's also the story of the journey of like how the skill even got here, through the African slave trade, and how, despite the fact that many things have been beaten out of us or have been washed away, this is a skill that has surpassed the test of time. And I feel like a deep connection to my ancestors when I make a piece, and I'm always I don't know, I have a sense of accomplishment once I create one as well. These two latest pieces I made are a two-part series called The Story of Rice. The one on the left represents the journey Africans took to America to get here. So that's why it's in this oblong shape, reminiscent of a slave boat. But also I incorporated hair and rice because a lot of times people didn't know where they were going. And so to ensure that they had something to eat, a lot of people would braid okra, rice, or other seeds into their hair so that whenever they got to wherever they got to, they would have something to eat. They would still be able to make use of the land and be able to survive. So this is part one. And part two demonstrates it's the mini rice fanner overflowing with rice, because the baskets brought so much prosperity to America and to this part of the world. So it's a two-part piece that they're more or less sisters of one another. It's the beginning of the journey and more or less the end of the journey. And that's all I have. If you want to contact me, you can find my work on donovansnype.com, basketframes.com, and also on Instagram. And you can also email me or call me if you have any questions about the craft or my work.
Thank you so much, Donovan. If I could ask Melonie and Adebunmi to all turn your cameras on, and you too, Donovan, don't go anywhere. Wonderful. I just have to say, personally, I'm overawed, overwhelmed by all of your work and how beautiful it is. And I did notice each of you say in the language that was particular to you about how the land has its own awareness, has its own knowledge. I believe, Melonie, you said that place carries generational knowledge. Adebunmi, you said land is a repository for memory. And Donovan, you said that the water never forgets. And I was wondering what the experience was like learning from the land. So, you know, each of you are artists, you've learned from people, you've learned in school, but how was interacting with that different kind of knowledge? What was that experience like for you?
Well, for me, I know gathering the materials, although I don't get to do it that often, it does make you gain a deeper appreciation for your work and just how, I don't know, how precious nature is. And just because we live in a world where everything can just be replicated so easily, everything is just plastic and just silicone. But when you have something from nature, there's always like a story behind it. So for me, the land is I don't know, it teaches you through experience. It teaches you through just its presence. It is what it is, and you make of it what you can comprehend, or you make of it what you can't. Like it's that it's just kind of that black and white. So learning from nature is very I guess rewarding and kind of telling, I guess, about yourself, because nature will tell you about you. So well, that's been my experience.
I guess I would say like a couple of things. When I went to True Blue for the first time and I saw that kind of saturated red clay, it brought me back to a trip to Nigeria. That was kind of the first time that I remember seeing land so red. And I think that did something to me. It really emphasized that like we've known this land, you know, in the ways that Donovan talked about, like how these techniques and things were brought with us through the Middle Passage. I mean, rice and indigo are not indigenous to North America. So, and so slave traders were going to those countries that had that knowledge of rice, of indigo, Sierra Leone, Guinea, you know, Senegal, Nigeria, because we have that knowledge. Working with the land directly, I'll like share quickly a moment I had, because that shift with working specifically with the soil brought me into a new material. I wasn't working in ceramics prior to that moment. And there, as I was learning like how to work in ceramics and like what forms am I gonna make, it was like kind of a quick panic. There was a moment where I realized the fact that I could ask the question, like, what can I make of this land? Demonstrates an extreme, like, I guess, gift and like kind of autonomy that my ancestors didn't have. They didn't have that decision of what can come from this land. They were forced to grow and you know, of that land. So not only did it kind of relieve that immediate stress, but it gave me a deeper sense of like what this is, not just material, this is ancestral, this is spiritual, and like all of this is in it, I carry with me as a descendant of this land. And it's really amazing because I, to this day, could take the soil, form it into clay, and it still sprouts. Like I've posted images of the plant life that is still growing from the land. And it's like, obviously it remembers what it's been forced to do for the last 400 years. Like I can't necessarily see with my naked eye the seeds or what is kind of producing this plant life, but truly like this land has not forgotten. So it's been really humbling, and I think it's deepened my practice to be not only just a material one, but like a spiritual one.
One of the things that when I was younger, I moved at a pretty fast clip all the time. And I did not know yet how to slow down. And when I would go foraging, that was the only time that everything else dropped away from me. All of the, you know, daily stresses, the bills and kids and, you know, what everybody experiences. When I was walking the land, it taught me to slow down. I had to slow down enough to be able to see what was going on around me, partly because I lived in a place where there were rattlesnakes, but also because I needed to be able to see what I was seeking. And it made me much more conscious of being in the moment and being in that place. That's something that I was able to translate into my studio practice and into other aspects of my life. That slowing down and just being present right now and focusing on this moment, not thinking about what happened yesterday or 50 years ago, not thinking about tomorrow or, 20 years from now. And that really changed my life once I learned how to slow down. And this is something that I learned from being on the land. It changed everything in my life. It also taught me that your materials are limited in what they will allow you to do. It's like the land is very limited on what you can do with it. The materials are also limited with what you can do with them. And if you stop and you listen to them, a lot of times I will get something, say a pigment, and it will sit on a shelf for months or maybe years before I know what it wants. I have to listen to it. I have to look at it every once in a while, smell it, feel it, and kind of take stock of it or something. And it will eventually tell me where it wants to go and how it wants to get there. And that was something else that came out of just spending time walking the land and looking for things.
Thank you to all of you. That was fantastic answers. Something else that jumped out at me that was a uniting factor in everything that you were talking about. Let me see if I can phrase this properly. So because foraging is such a ecologically related field, and every time we tend to think about ecology and the situation that we're in right now, there is too much of a tendency to see humans as a plague, to see humans as something who have devastated this beautiful place that we live on. But all of you mentioned ways that humans were working in reciprocity with the land, were, to use Adebunmi's word, a vessel, they were vessels of knowledge, they were vessels of intimacy with land, and could even carry both that awareness and knowledge. And again, like both Donovan and Adebunmi were saying, materials, seeds with them, indigo with them to a new place. I guess I wonder if you see foraging as a potential way from this point where we're struggling with how do humans fit in this landscape. Do you see it as a way for people to move forward in a different way, to reestablish that reciprocity? Yeah, to just redefine their relationship with place.
I'll jump on that one. Watching the movement, I guess, I don't know what else to call it, of people into the field of pigments, artists and all the scientists, everybody. I've been watching that, and especially during COVID and since it, more people are going back to some kind of craft. In my case, people are out foraging for pigments. They're foraging for color making materials, whether it's a mineral or a botanical pigment, it doesn't matter. But it's something that is taking them out of their normal space of that busy daily, life, commercial life, and it's slowing them down, and they're starting to look at the environment in different ways. Oh, this is not just something that we can, like, if I recycle, that's all I need to do. I know people who, have learned how to pick up garbage as they're out on their walks, not just how to pick up garbage, but how to see garbage, see the detritus of humans. So these people are starting to build relationships with the places where they live and where they forage. And I think it's changing, it's creating a whole new gestalt, or maybe it's revitalizing an old one, you know, where people actually stewarded the land, whether they owned it or not. They took care of it.
Yeah, definitely. We used to be at a point in time where everybody just kind of instinctively knew to not litter, not trash the place that
Yeah.
you're in, because like I said, your environment forms your physical reality, and anything that you do in there, the experience that you have there is going to form your spiritual reality. So you should want to make your nature as clean and as ecological as possible. Otherwise, it's going to poison you, which is what we're currently seeing. We're having issues with crop now. That's why grocery stores aren't as filled as they used to be, and things are flooding. It's kind of, we kind of get back what we put in, and when we take and pollute, we get that back. And I think if people were foraging more and working in the land, like, you can't really, it's like working with somebody. Like, you can not like somebody, but if you have to work with them for a long time, you find a way to work with each other and get things accomplished. And since we've been removed from having to work with the land, we kind of rebel against it, and now we're seeing it rebel against us. So I think foraging would definitely help us regain a connection to this place that we're in.
I mean, I guess I just want to mention that this, like, especially with Black people and our relationship to the land, it's really systemic. Like, when I like thinking about our relationship to the land and how that has slowly or drastically kind of shifted, you know, through slavery. One, I guess, picking up on what you said, Kimberly, about like all us mentioning like how these were kind of indigenous practices of us working with the land. So you think like we weren't brought here with our things, like what we were brought here is with what we carried within ourselves, that knowledge, that relationship. And you see through colonialism and slavery, how that the ways in which we still try and help kind of hold on to our relationship to the land through acts of resistance. Like, I think of the ways in which Maroon communities had to know the land. I think to survive and maintain their kind of freedom. I think of, you know, fugitive slaves or people escaping from slavery and how they had to know the land, know which plants to eat to survive, read the plants in order to know how to like kind of traverse and navigate woodlands and you know, going through state lines and things. And then you see kind of laws after emancipation where we couldn't forage anymore to like sustain and feed ourselves because those lands weren't owned by us. But there was always acts of resistance in the ways in which Black people still tried to farm their land, grow their own food, claim spaces. And I think of just, you know, systemically, and even like how there's policies, especially now, that are in place to disconnect us, keep us separate from the land. You know, a lot of kind of descendant communities all across this country are butted up against major toxic chemical plants. You know, I think of like, you know, Death Valley in Louisiana, or, you know, just a lot of communities. And that's intentional. And even in my own spiritual practices, I am learning more about indigenous African religions our relationship to the land is foundation. You know, there's ways in which we understand the energies of the water, of the leaf, of the sky, of the air. There's ceremonies that don't even start without herbs. So I think, and I'm not sure if I'm answering your question, but I guess what I'm trying to allude to is, on one level, it is important for us to connect with land and connect back to land. But then I also think of the systemic and kind of walls or policies that are in place just to keep us separate. And that's intentional. So I think there has to be, when we think of like environmental justice, there has to not just be an effort on the person, but it has to be a greater movement in us looking at like the policies that are in place and eradicate those and really deal with those directly.
Thank you so much for bringing that up. I can totally hear you. In a smaller and food foraging way, it reminds me of, there's a forager named Alexis Nicole Nelson. She's the Black forager, and she's really introduced a bunch of people to foraging and discusses those topics a lot, and they're incredibly relevant. One more quick question from me, and then we've got a few questions coming in the chat that I would love to specifically ask you, and anybody listening, if you have specific questions to throw out, please do. Another thing that unifies all of you is, in different ways, a sort of distance from the land that it features in your artwork. Donovan, you said you're living in New York. Adebunmi, you said you're living near Philly, and Melonie, you very generously were telling us about how it has been a long time since you've been able to really inhabit the land the way that you used to. And I wonder how that has changed your perspective on your work, just having that distance or having to go to be part of it, just anything really.
I guess, well, for me, one, I live in a part of Philly that is next to a lot of woodlands. It's just been like a part of like what I value in terms of a quality of life, to be connected to nature, kind of close to nature. But I think the beauty in like that the earth, the land is my material, is it always keeps me kind of returning and going to South Carolina, because my materials don't exist in an art store. They exist on this ancestral land. And I guess going back to the point I made in the presentation, like I'm very aware of how things could easily slip into kind of a practice of extraction where I'm constantly taking. There was even a moment where it hit me like, I am selling plantations in the form of vessels, and like, what is my role in kind of the continuum of like selling or kind of putting this land within a type of market in this time. So I think what grounds me and keeps me connected always is making sure that what I receive from the land goes back. Not only that I return, I physically go back, but the money I make from the sales of my work go back to support family members who are caring from the land, that I am going back to document these histories through video and photo and oral interviews, so that generations from me, we could have kind of continue that relationship to the land in our history, and like participating in like cemetery cleanups, where we're recovering headstones and removing whole trunks of trees. So In a way, I'm like very grateful that my material forces me in a way to keep that connection constantly. Even right now, I'm like, okay, when is my next trip to South Carolina? Because I'm getting low on soil. So I'm grateful for the land for that.
Yeah, for me, living in New York, it's really impossible for me to get any of the materials here, just because, as Adebunmi said, they don't exist here. And with the exception of maybe like pine needles, I can't really go to a store to get them. So I'm heavily reliant upon my mother to send me things, and she's heavily reliant on the people that can actually still go and get the materials. And that in and of itself is a challenge, just because traditionally the material has been just available on open fields of land, within the South or around South Carolina and along the coast. But a lot of that land has been privatized and is now a golf course or a resort or something else. And going on that land is a crime. Now, South Carolina does have some efforts to preserve it. Sweetgrass basket making is the state's craft. It's the official state craft. So there's some preservation impetus on it. It's a very hardy grass and it can kind of grow in a lot of rough environments. So you'll see it now as decoration. Like if you come to Charleston, you'll see it along every business and in the front. It's because when it blooms, it has these nice purple leaves and it's very pretty, but what grows for decoration isn't necessarily what is good for an actual use. So even though we kind of have it everywhere, it's you can see it more now, it's still not the kind that you would want to use. The quality isn't quite the same. So back to that ecology thing, there's everything in the environment is affected by what we do to it, and this is no exception. So it's been quite challenging getting things, but in that challenge, it really just makes me appreciate my work even more, because it speaks to the fact that it's not something that you can just go to Target and get. You have to have an experience in order for it to be created. So I think it's very important to keep our connection to the land so that we can appreciate where we are.
You just really hit something on the head there, Donovan, when you said you have to have that experience. And for me, I've lost half or more of that experience of being able to go out on the land and to gather my own materials. And that when I use materials that are shared with me, there's a sense of joy and appreciation for all of the people who are contributing for me to be able to do this. But there's also a sense of personal grief that I am now physically, literally separated from the land. And I think that a lot of humans feel that grief and don't recognize exactly what it is yet. That we have been separated from it by industrialization and the economy and all sorts of things, too many things. And I think that there are people all over the world, probably most of us have some sense of mourning or loss or feeling of grief. That needs to be identified, because once you identify that feeling,
Definitely.
then you can do something about it. And I want people to think about how they feel, if they're separated from something that they love and something that they need, something that nourishes and nurtures them. And for all of us, that really does go back to the land. That's where we get our food. That's where we get so much of our materials for daily living. All of the minerals that are extracted from the earth, copper alone is absolutely essential for human life nowadays. I mean, even candy bars have copper in them. Even Hershey's chocolate bars have copper in them. And we need that for nourishment, for our nutrition. And we have to shift our thinking and look at what we need as humans outside of that commercial and economic realm. And that connection with the land is the most essential and atavistic thing that exists in us. It goes back to the very first little even thought of humanness. Is the land is what sustains us. I mean, we don't live on air alone.
Thank you so much, all of you. And Melonie, I think your point of how much that grief is wreathed around everything, but we haven't been able to collectively name it as much, and how essential that is absolutely huge. We have had some questions coming in on the Q&A. A lot of them, clearly we've got some crafters in here because a lot of them are very specific and concrete. One to you, Donovan, is for the sweetgrass hair and rice piece, did you use fabric to mount the piece, and what did you use and why?
What did I use? I used an adhesive. It already kind of had like a felt backing, but I put a how do I describe it? It's almost like a burlap material on top of it, just because it's one of the things that were used to carry things as well. So I put the burlap in there, and then I stuck the basket on top of that and glued that, and then the hair itself I had to kind of weave into the basket. So like I got to a point where I was there, and then I kind of had to braid it in, and then use the rice, make sure that's glued properly, dry it, and then braid that as well, and then kind of get it together. So adhesive, burlap, and sweetgrass and palmetto and hair.
Thank you. Adebunmi, we have a two-parter for you. Can you explain how you changed the soil that you foraged into clay sculpture with the hair and rice? And then there was also someone asking if you can talk about your modeling and firing process, and asked if the vessels are hand-built.
Yeah, so I guess transforming the soil into viable clay could take, it depends on what type of kind of vessel I want. To be honest, just to add water is enough to make it viable clay, just like getting the right kind of proportion water to soil and mixing it. I could hand build from that. But for me, to make it a little bit more plastic, the clay like moldable, I add in 2 other clays, bentonite and ball clay, but it's majority the soil, because the more of those additional clays, it changes the color sometimes in the firing process. In terms of my building process and firing process, I really try, to be honest, like in every step of the process, to be deeply intentional and making sure that everything I do, whether it's the material, the ways I kind of engage with the material, fire it, all speaks to the history in which I'm representing. So the hand build, I do hand build, but I use an indigenous Nigerian coil technique, because I really do think about how we carry this history within our body. So a lot of times I feel like I am continuing these traditions through my own body and practice. And then majority of my work is pit fired, this process of literally like digging a hole or building an underground or in the ground kiln, burying the work in wood chips, or things of the land, and setting it on fire. But for me, since my soil comes from a burial ground. I wanted the kind of finishing process of firing to really resemble that, and the kind of black kind of marks on the vessel is created from the smoke, really like kissing the piece and leaving a memory of how the fire, that element kind of kissed this vessel. So the black is from the carbon of the smoke, and the orange is the natural color of the clay. So yeah.
It's beautiful. We got a question from a natural dyer based in New Bedford, Massachusetts, who asks, how can I ensure that I keep my practice in alignment with respect and connection with my surroundings and materials versus making pretty colors for the sake of art?
Mm. Oh,
Melonie, you're muted.
That's actually a question that I struggle with. And I think that it has a lot to do with intent. In my background, when you create something, whether it's a meal or a piece of art or whatever you're doing, you are supposed to come to it with what's called being of good mind, which means that you don't approach whatever you're going to do if you're angry or upset, or if your emotions are in a negative space. You have to put that away, and then you come to your work. That's intent. That is like setting the stage for being able to do something in a good way, and in a true way. When we're creating for the sake of making money only, that's a problem. Your intent is not being of good mind. You are not of good mind. It's a very superficial thing. And it's that division between intent and superficiality, and okay, what is my objective with this piece? Am I trying to tell a story? Am I trying to educate? Or am I just, I need $50 right now to pay my water bill? Well, we have to pay the water bill. If you're approaching paying that water bill with the anxiety and the distress and everything about the water bill, that goes into your piece. That goes into your work. If you're making dinner and you're upset, your food doesn't taste as good, and it doesn't feel as good. So I think it has a lot to do with that intent and how you approach your work. The other thing is understanding your materials. If you don't understand your materials, you need to back up and start over again. I don't know if that helps.
and I guess, I mean, I know the question wasn't directed to me, but I just wanted to add, like, in respect of like the materials, especially when they come from the land. Before I went to True Blue, I consulted with like anthropologists and archaeologists that do that, that are going to burial grounds, and we discussed like what is the proper way to observe the land, like how, making sure that I'm not digging up bodies, making sure when I am doing the digs that I'm not breaking up any natural plant life or disturbing the natural ecologies of the land. We talked about like even indigenous ways, like giving libation, like pouring water for the land, leaving fruit for the ancestors in this space. You know, the proper kind of tools to do these digs. You know, what tools should I use? So there was a lot of kind of conversation with experts and people who do this professionally, because in the grand scheme of things, I am an artist. I'm not an anthropologist or archaeologist, although there's like intersections. So I wanted to make sure that I was being responsible by consulting with them. I had like a anthropology intern who was studying to become an anthropologist that were all a part of my team. So, you know, so that I was really being responsible and understanding how just the simple act of like digging soil could really disrupt things or be in like tandem and unison with the land.
Thank you so much. I am afraid, even though we are getting wonderful questions and we could probably just keep at this for hours, I'm afraid that we are coming up on time. So I'm going to hand this back over to Rachel to talk about logistical things. We've had a few people asking when the recording will be available, and I bet that is information that you have.
It is. I just wanted to pop back in to officially close out this program. Thank all of our speakers, our wonderful moderator, and thanks to everybody who joined us today and who was able to stick around a little later than usual to just listen in on such an incredible conversation. Thank you so much to all of you. And yes, the program is recorded and is typically available within 1 or 2 weeks after the program. So I believe that'll be going out in an email to everybody who registered, and it'll be up on our website. So again, thanks so much, everybody, and have a wonderful rest of your day.